This guy's a gambler, Carol. That's why he leaves the cards.
Next, it's the ITV News. Then later at 11, Georgia gets a second chance at love with cowboy Shane, and Katie and Ian's love reaches new heights. They're Aussies on the prowl for the perfect English rose. They're desperately seeking Sheila.
The death of Tommy Harris has stunned the residents of this quiet part of Manchester. More shocking still is that as this community mourns, his killer remains at large.
A crime that shook the street and shocked a nation.
Suspicion is everywhere. It could be a friend, a neighbor, even a family member. The police have launched a murder hunt and have urged locals with any information to come forward.
Some secrets stay dead and buried. But sometimes they come back to haunt you.
But what's certain is, the truth lies here, somewhere on Coronation Street.
Don't you recognize me? I am you. I am you 50 years from now. I am your future. I'm still in pretty good shape, no? You know, you've been born into a fast-changing world, but you have a wonderful mind. You'll see and do some amazing things in your life. You're going to travel far across time, space. I know what you are thinking. It all sounds like a logistical nightmare. Don't worry. Watch. Yes, watch. There are people who will help to organize your life. They'll play a big part in your future. Ah, Hector, nice to see you again. You know you're gonna have a good life. I'm sorry, a big nose.
Want to get rid of the wires? Get a wireless laptop with technology designed for lightweight. Make sure it has Intel Centrino mobile technology built in.
I need perfection. Elnet, for me, it's the best hairspray in the world.
With a unique micro diffuser, it sprays microfine. It holds until you simply brush it through. Create any style, it's non-sticky. Elnet, for a satin soft touch and long-lasting hold. Elnet, L'Oreal's finest hairspray, used by the finest stylists.
Guys?
Tom, what is that?
Nothing?
Have you got the pot noodle horn?
Of course not.
Let me see.
Okay, I have got the pot noodle horn. It's big and brassy, and I'm going to blow it.
Tom!
No time for chit-chat, baby. Sorry about that.
Mate, we all get the pot noodle horn sometimes. Have you got the pot noodle horn? New
Nutrigrain Chewy is too chewily delicious for words.
Life in the outback's tough. That's why our Aussies are desperately seeking Sheila. That's after the ITV News with Trevor McDonald.
New blow for Blair tonight. The man who launched his career votes against the terror laws. Lord Irvine is one of the Prime Minister's closest political friends and even introduced him to his wife Cherie. But tonight he joined the rebellion against the new terror laws as the government suffered a heavy defeat. We'll be assessing the impact of the vote. Also tonight...
I feel total disgust that you should think that I'm here as a political pawn.
The Tories turn to people power as they step up their campaign. In the red, we reveal how Britain's hospitals ran up a debt of £500 million. And Mourinho's anger, why the Chelsea boss is all fired up before tomorrow's vital game.
In the West Country, thanks but no thanks. Devon Seafar Centre rejects charity cash, saying the government must step in.
Good evening. The government suffered a mauling in the House of Lords tonight over its anti-terror laws. 20 Labour Lords voted against the government. Even the Prime Minister's one-time mentor, his old boss in legal chambers, Lord Irvine, joined opponents of the bill. Overall, the Lords voted against it by a ratio of almost 2 to 1. They insisted that judges and not the Home Secretary should decide whether to impose the so-called control orders on terror suspects. Our political editor, Nick Robinson, is at Westminster tonight. Nick?
Trevor, it was the biggest defeat in the Lords for the government since they reformed it. Former law lords joined former legal officers, who joined former Home Secretaries, an ex-chief constable of the Metropolitan Police. But most painful of all for Tony Blair, his former friend, his one-time boss, his ex-Lord Chancellor. The man who once enforced Tony Blair's will in the Lords tonight defied it. Derry Irvine, one-time employer of the Blairs, a friend and a colleague, rebelled for the first time. He told surprised colleagues in the Lords, "I've voted with my conscience," and he was not alone.
There are voted contents 249, not contents 119, so the contents have it.
A record government defeat. The Tories and the Liberal Democrats have been joined by 20 Labour rebels.
And there comes a time when we must take a stand which is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but we take the stand because it's right. And that is what this House is being asked to do today, and I hope we'll remember it as we're asked to go to the lobbies.
And what I believe history will never forgive us for is in the pressure and the acute nature of the danger we face, doing things which actually prove counterproductive historically in terms of winning the battle for hearts and minds.
The principle that united them all, that only a court should deprive citizens of their liberty.
The idea of a politician being able to put people they don't like in prison reminds one of the motto of the National Lottery. It could be you, my lords.
To which Lord Irvine's successor could only plead that ministers were simply trying to protect the public.
We've got to do what we think is right, and we think what is right is seeking to strike the balance between protecting people from terrorism, but at the same time preserving people's civil liberties at the same time.
Yesterday, that argument received powerful backing from the last head of the Metropolitan Police, Sir John Stevens. But today, his predecessor, Lord Condon, rejected it and voted to oppose the new laws. Laws that will leave the Lords in tatters and leave Tony Blair with a stark choice: fight on and risk defeat, or back down and risk losing face.
And Nick, which is he going to choose?
I think he'll have to back down, because many Labour MPs will demand just what their lordship demanded tonight, that judges are involved in all control orders, not just those on house arrest, and that the burden of proof must be much higher than what's called reasonable suspicion. What will be harder for Tony Blair to swallow, though, is backing what the Lords are likely to vote for tomorrow night, namely that these laws should run out. They should die in a matter of months' time, and he should go through this whole debate all over again. That is, if he is still Prime Minister. That he might try to hold on to. But remember this, Trevor, whatever happens, despite all the ping-ponging this week, we are still likely to get control orders which are legally unprecedented, limiting people's liberties in a way we've never seen before.
Nick Robinson, thank you. A story of personal struggle against the public services stole the political agenda again today and embarrassed the government. Maria Hutchings, the mother of an autistic son, stood on a Conservative Party podium to criticise the lack of proper education for her son and others with special needs. Here's our senior political correspondent, John Ray.
Maria wants to say something. And once again, we will listen to one woman's personal experience of public services.
Do you think it was easy for me today to come here and stand and talk about all the things that have been wrong with my son?
Her son, John Paul, is autistic. His mother worries his special school could be closed. That makes her an ally of Michael Howard. But does it make her a pawn in Tory election plans too?
I feel total disgust that you should think that I'm here as a political pawn. I don't want this to be a media circus where you all stand there and say, oh, look at the Conservative Party using Maria Hutchings. They have not used me. I'm my own woman.
Hang on, you see, if you wouldn't mind...
Mr Blair knows that to his cost. She confronted him on live TV last month. Then they had a private chat afterwards. Tonight, Labour publicly answered her arguments.
Well, the Conservatives closed 230 special schools while Michael Howard was in the Cabinet. We think it's right that parents do have a choice between special schools or the mainstream sector. Whichever sector they're in, they deserve high-quality teachers with real investment in the facilities and the skilled staff that make a difference.
Yet the government is again on the defensive, as it was last week in the so-called War of Margaret's Shoulder. Much credit to this man, Linton Crosby, the Tories' chief strategist, who's won time and again with similar tactics for Australia's Conservatives. And in the Labour camp, a hint of jitters.
Given that it's now in the fourth week and it's the same each week, you would think by now we'd have worked out a way of opposing it, and I think we need to be a bit smarter on that.
For the Conservatives, Maria Hutchings and whoever else they have up their sleeves are powerful advocates. They cut through often complicated argument and pack an almost unanswerable emotional punch. Labour can claim all this distorts the truth, but in love, war and elections, pretty much anything goes. John Ray, ITV News, Westminster.
A pullout of sorts by Syrian troops began in Lebanon today. It isn't precisely what the people of Lebanon have been campaigning for, and it certainly isn't what the Americans have been demanding. But Syria agreed to pull its troops back to just inside Lebanon's border with Syria. Our international editor Bill Neely looks at how serious the withdrawal is.
They're pulling back, but are they pulling out? Syrian troops are on the move, but there's no sign yet they're leaving Lebanon for good. And the US says that's not good enough. The presidents of Syria and Lebanon kissed and smiled today and agreed a partial withdrawal. But Syria's leader is isolated and Lebanon is weak. And there are fears that a pullout might lead to chaos.
Syria sees itself as a big power, sees Lebanon as part of Greater Syria, and has dominated its smaller neighbour since the civil war there tore the country apart. It was a war that lasted 15 years and killed 150,000 people. A war eventually ended by Syrian troops and tanks. The world applauded as Syrian troops moved in. But the world's moved on and things have changed. Today, Syrian troops are heading home, or at least north. First to the Bekaa Valley, just inside Lebanon's border. Of the 15,000 Syrian troops in Lebanon, a third, around 5,000, are expected to move soon. The big question, when will they actually cross into Syria, and when will the rest of the troops leave? And then there's Syria's silent army, thousands of spies, officials and others who after 30 years are embedded in Lebanese society. Will they go? And what might they do if they stay?
Syrian officials are already hinting that the demonstrations in Beirut again today could lead to civil strife.
And what is happening in Lebanon in terms of disturbance and now
some sort of friction in the country. Now, these things could develop into something terrible.
The Syrians may cut some ties with Lebanon, but they can still pull the strings. That's no good for the US, which wants democracy there and all across the Middle East. In Lebanon tomorrow, another group takes center stage, the pro-Syrian gunmen of the Hezbollah militia. They'll mount a huge protest. They say Syria's withdrawal could lead to mayhem. Lebanon may be at the start of a very bumpy ride. Bill Neely, ITV News.
It's a breakthrough the government's been hoping for in the battle against MRSA. New figures show that superbug infections in NHS hospitals are falling. They're at their lowest level since 2001. The superbug still accounts for around 44% of all hospital infections in Britain, just about the highest rate in Europe. And that isn't the only health service worry for patients. After news of the weekend that Great Ormond Street is in the red, tonight we can highlight a £500 million overspend by English hospitals. With the end of the financial year still 4 weeks away, one NHS trust is £20 million over its budget. Our medical correspondent Sue Saville has this report.
It's a world-class children's hospital, but at Great Ormond Street, operations have been cancelled, beds closed and nurses' overtime slashed to reduce a £1.7 million or 1% overspend. The hospital's chief executive says they're victims of their own success, having treated too many patients.
We've actually treated more patients this year than we were expected to treat, which in some ways is good. But we haven't got enough money to go on treating them at that same sort of rate. And therefore we've had to take some measures just towards the end of this financial year to make sure that we don't overspend. Like all hospitals, we have to live within our means.
It's not just this world-renowned hospital that's overrun its budget. A survey of all 28 strategic health authorities found that 15 of them expect to be in deficit when the financial year ends early next month. Some analysts say the NHS accounting system is reaching breaking point. The deficit at Great Ormond Street Hospital is dwarfed by the overspend elsewhere. Health authorities across the country now owe £553 million. So who are the worst offenders? Mid Yorkshire Hospitals Trust is £20 million overspent. St George's Health Trust in South London has also racked up debts of £20 million. And the Surrey and Sussex Healthcare Trust has a deficit of more than £19 million. Money going into the NHS has gone up by more than 50% in the past 8 years, but pressure to cut waiting lists and the cost of staff reforms have absorbed much of the cash.
It's gone into recruiting new staff, paying those staff more, new drugs, dealing with historic debt. Now, when you put that alongside the government's aims to reduce maximum waiting times, which has meant the use of lots of expensive agency nursing staff, then you can see how trusts can get themselves into financial difficulties very quickly.
Any debts must be carried over to the next financial year, adding further strain to a system already under pressure. Sue Saville, ITV News.
Thousands of people lined the streets of Rome today to pay their respects to an Italian secret agent who was shot by American soldiers in Iraq. Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi was among the mourners at the state funeral for Nicola Calipari. Applause broke out when his coffin was brought into the church. Calipari was killed shielding Italian hostage Giuliana Serena. Meanwhile, in Iraq, the violence goes on. 30 people were killed today in attacks around the country. In Balad, a suicide bomber blew up his car outside the house of an Iraqi army officer, killing 12 people. And at the Michael Jackson trial, his brother, the brother of one of the star's teenage accusers, says Jackson showed them pornographic websites, gave them alcohol, and appeared in front of them naked. The brother said Jackson had warned them not to tell anyone what they were up to. When an RAF Hercules crashed in Iraq, killing 10 British servicemen, Iraqi insurgents claimed they'd shot it down. That theory was initially played down by defense chiefs, but tonight it seems the most likely explanation. Today, Defense Secretary Jeff Hoon gave details of an interim report which, as Lauren Taylor explains, ruled out most other possibilities.
This was the footage of what Iraqi insurgents claimed was a British Hercules they had shot down. Now the theory of a missile attack is looking more likely after the initial investigation by the Royal Air Force. The incident was the biggest single loss of British life in Iraq since military action began in 2003. 10 servicemen died in the crash during what was described as a routine flight from Baghdad to a US base 20 miles from the capital. The Defence Secretary has now issued a statement with the findings so far.
Sabotage has been ruled out. No bomb had been slipped on board, nor had the Hercules been deliberately damaged. It wasn't caused by an explosion in the cargo, nor by an engine fire, nor metal fatigue. Also ruled out a lightning strike, a mid-air collision, hitting birds or any other object. That leaves the possibility that it was hit by some kind of missile fired from the ground.
Whatever sort of missile hit this aircraft, it implies that all aerial activity around Iraq has got to be a lot more careful. It's not clear what this aircraft was doing at 10,000 feet. At that height it was vulnerable to either a very lucky shot or a shot from a more sophisticated air defence missile. Clearly you can't afford, in the Sunny Triangle, going into Ballard Air Base as it was, to mess around at 10,000 feet. You've either got to stay at 30,000 feet or, as Hercules do, then dive down for a very swift, quick landing.
There's been speculation that the Hercules may have been involved in a Special Forces mission, which could explain why it was flying low. The MOD won't comment on that and still won't say definitively what caused the crash. But given what's been ruled out, the rest of the inquiry is likely to focus on what kind of missile was used to such devastating effect. Lauren Taylor, ITV News.
In the city, the defence firm BAE Systems announces taking over its American rival United Defence Industries for £2.1 billion. The FT 100 share index ended weekly down 9 to close at 5,027. The Dow Jones closed at 10,936, down 3. And the pound is trading at $1.91, down 0.75%. And now with tonight's sports news, here's Felicity Marr.
Thank you, Trevor. On the eve of Chelsea's Champions League showdown with Barcelona, Jose Mourinho has launched another attack on UEFA and one of the competition's referees. He claims Anders Frisk was biased during the first leg in Spain and accuses UEFA of lying. Our sports editor Tim Hewitt reports from Stamford Bridge.
Chelsea went out to train at Stamford Bridge tonight, still smarting from the perceived injustices of the first leg in Barcelona. Manager Jose Mourinho blames their defeat largely on referee Anders Frisk, who he says was approached by the Barcelona manager at half-time and then sent off striker Didier Drogba. Italy's Pierluigi Collina will be in charge tomorrow, but tonight Mourinho denied UEFA claims that he'd asked for Collina and, astonishingly, said he wanted Frisk back.
Because maybe he would help us the same way he helped them. We need to play better than them. That's the first point. The second point is to have a referee without influence in the result.
It's guaranteed even more tension at a replay already attracting relentless media hype.
It's tempting to talk about this being Chelsea's toughest game so far this season, but the truth is that every match they play is now surrounded by enormous pressure. Luckily for them, they have a manager who thrives on it.
Several Barcelona players have dismissed Chelsea as inferior opponents, although their comments tonight were more restrained.
Yeah, we expected more of Chelsea because they have a lot of good players, and the way they played was a bit surprising, you know, very defending.
Defending will not be Chelsea's priority tomorrow. It's a match they have to win. Tim Hewitt, ITV News, Stamford Bridge.
Ruud van Nistelrooy has been singled out as the man to keep Manchester United's Champions League hopes alive. United must win away at AC Milan tomorrow, a task their manager rates as his toughest European challenge ever.
I have to trust my players because they've done it so many times. It's not the easiest task I've ever had. It's probably the hardest. It is the hardest, but it's not an impossible task. And in football, you know, the goals change games, and we have to get the goal that changes this game tomorrow.
Manchester City boss Kevin Keegan has confirmed he will leave the club at the end of next season. The fans may force him out sooner with many more results like tonight. City lost 1-0 at home to local rivals Bolton. El Hadj Diouf getting the only goal. City didn't have a shot on target all match. The closest they came to equalising was this effort from Kiki Masampa. Keegan's hopes of a UEFA Cup place now seem further away than ever. England's under-fire rugby coach Andy Robinson has kept faith with the side that has had a disastrous Six Nations campaign so far. Ian Bolshaw is the only change from the team that faced Ireland. He comes in at fullback to replace the injured Jason Robinson for Saturday's match against Italy. And that is tonight's sport. Trevor.
Thanks, Felicity. I'm back in a few minutes with a reminder of our headlines and a look at some of the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. First, though, let's rejoin our ITV colleagues around the UK.
Good evening. On West Country News tonight, no more charity. Young Offenders Rehab Centre CFAR says the government must pay up. And beating the bug, Regent's Hospital's winning the battle against the MRSA virus. The Young Offenders Rehabilitation Centre CFAR is set to turn down a financial offer to keep it open. Bosses say it can't keep accepting money from charitable trusts when the Home Office only contributes 9% of its annual budget.
Staff and clients are attempting to remain positive as CFAR begins what could be its last week. After failing to secure Home Office funding, the Young Offenders have written to the Prime Minister to try to help this alternative to prison.
I think it's wrong that they should have to beg the government to get money to help keep their crime statistics and that down, because that's what they're doing basically. They're preventing us from going to jail, and they're keeping crime figures, although it's a small number, they're still keeping them figures low for them.
CFAR has been attempting to teach an old-fashioned prison system new tricks. Here, education and life skills replace being locked in a cell as a cure to the life of crime. The Home Office says CFAR should cut its costs, but the charity argues it's still cheaper than prison. If CFAR receives no further government help, then liquidators will be called in by Friday. Seth Conway in Highhampton for West Country News.
A hospital in Cornwall's leading the battle against MRSA with a new campaign to beat the bug before it hits the wards. The announcement comes as government figures reveal it's finally getting the better of the killer virus.
The number of the cases of the killer hospital bug MRSA is apparently at its lowest level since records began 4 years ago. Plymouth Hospital's trust is the most improved in the region, cutting a third off the number of MRSA cases on its wards. But that said, it's still the 12th worst specialist hospital in the country when it comes to MRSA. Improvements too at Exeter's RD&E and at the Royal Cornwall Hospital in Truro. It's reduced the number of overall cases, but still spends more bed days treating victims than any other hospital in the region. Managers there are now trialling a new checking system where all orthopaedic patients are screened for the bacteria before arriving on wards.
Well, over the last 11 months, we've had nine patients we've actually detected were MRSA positive, and that has actually enabled us to treat them in the community before they're due to come in, so that they're not arriving unknown within an area and potentially causing a cross-infection risk to other patients.
It's not such good news for the rest of Devon, Dorset and Somerset. The 4 trusts that cover these areas all reporting an increase in patients infected with the bacteria compared to the previous 6 months. Colin Cayley for West Country News.
The police are investigating the death of the Cornish tank commander Sergeant Steve Roberts, killed during the invasion of Iraq. The Attorney General's asked officers from the Metropolitan Police to look into claims that he and an Iraqi civilian were shot by British soldiers who ignored the rules of engagement. A new campaign aimed at keeping pensioners safe in their own homes is being launched by the government. Hundreds of people have already fallen victim to bogus callers. The new initiative reminds people to lock, stop, chain and check every time they answer the door. Now, an Exmouth school has man's best friend to thank for helping turn around the school's fortunes. It sounds unbelievable, I know, but a Yorkshire Terrier was appointed as a school governor at Exeter Road Primary 2 years ago after serious weaknesses were identified by Ofsted. Well, the school council thought Sparky would encourage good behaviour, and since then the school's test results have rocketed. I said it was unbelievable. Now let's get more news where you are.
Good evening. A permanent gypsy site has been given the go-ahead near Ashburton. A family of Romanis is to set up home at Little Acres at Dolbear after years of travelling around the country. They'll live in 4 caravans with a stone building as a day room. Tinbridge councillors approved the plan today. The government is paying to clean up the extensive damage caused to Boscastle when it was ravaged by floods last summer. North Cornwall District Council is being reimbursed around £500,000, the full sum it claimed to cover the costs. Some residents had doubted they'd receive any financial aid. The community is still rebuilding homes and businesses after heavy rain and flash floods tore through the village last August. Community workers in Stonehouse are distributing thousands of energy-saving light bulbs to locals on benefits as part of an eco-friendly campaign. Stonehouse Action has launched the scheme to raise awareness of the money that can be saved by installing energy-saving light bulbs. They're being distributed door to door and can also be collected at the foyer in Octagon Street on Tuesday and Thursday. Hundreds of Plymouth residents are being questioned about their household recycling habits as part of a new campaign. Plymouth City Council has employed a research team to learn what turns residents off recycling and how they can improve the situation. The steps are being taken to tackle Plymouth's waste problem. 9 community support officers who will patrol parts of Plymouth have begun their first day of training. They'll form high-visibility patrols, assist with truancy checks and look after abandoned vehicles. The officers come from a range of backgrounds and experience and will be based in the northeast of the city. Well, that's the news from the south. Now it's over to the Kate Reeves with the weather.
A window on West Country weather in association with Wessex Trains.
Good evening. A mostly dry and clear out there tonight, and a frost is likely as lows fall to freezing or even -1 inland. With light winds as well, we can expect some mist and fog. Well, tomorrow gradually the mist will lift to reveal another bright day. There is the chance of a light shower in the afternoon, but in the main it'll stay dry and sunny, the best of the sunshine along the south coast. We're looking further ahead now, and Wednesday looks fine and dry too, with some decent sunshine, feeling nice and pleasant in light winds. Looking good for Thursday as well, but there is the chance of showers later on during Friday. Now, temperatures should reach into double figures, but we've still got some cold and frosty nights to contend with. That's all from me. Good night.
A window on West Country weather in association with the Wessex Trains network.
That's it. I'll hand you back for the rest of the evening's news now in London with Trevor McDonald. From all of us, good night.
Hello again. A reminder of tonight's main news. The government suffered a heavy defeat in the House of Lords over its anti-terror laws, with the Lords voting against it by a ratio of almost 2 to 1. Syria has bowed to world pressure and promised to move its troops out of Lebanon. A pull-out of sorts began today. And it seems that the RAF Hercules, which crashed in Iraq, killing 10 British servicemen, could have been brought down by a missile. Most other possibilities have been ruled out. It's time now for a look at the front pages of some of tomorrow's newspapers. Angry Lords, savage terror bill is the Guardian's main headline. The photograph shows the son of Italian agent Nicola Calipari at his state funeral in Rome today. The Times reports that despite the introduction of chip and pin technology, credit card fraud has rocketed to a record £500 million. The Daily Telegraph says that England's chief medical officer, Sir Liam Donaldson, warned the government 5 months ago that legislation was needed to enforce hygiene standards in hospitals to prevent the spread of MRSA, but ministers failed to act. And the Daily Mirror's headline is, "Let me out." It claims the Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe wants to be allowed out of Broadmoor Prison to see his dying sister. And that's it so far this evening. Next on the ITV News channel, the anger of Maria Hutchins, the mother who's made special needs schools an election issue. Her speech today. We're back tomorrow, same time, 10:30. But from all of us here, good night.
It's like a fat wizard riding a dragon. It's a whale playing golf. Nope. He's in the bunker.
ITV National Weather, sponsored by Powergen.
Hello there. Well, it's going to be staying cloudy overnight tonight. In the main, it's a fairly dry menu.